All right. Hello. Good early afternoon. I hope you're having a good lunch break or whatever you are doing. And let's jump straight into it because today's topic is the zero bullshit language learning policy or method, if you like. This is not a defined method, as you can imagine. I don't have a registration mark attached to it or anything like that. What this is all about is avoiding the noise, right? Avoiding the poo, as I called it. And this is a little tricky. Some things I would argue are redundant for everybody and potentially harmful, and they slow you down and all that stuff. Some other stuff maybe is good for some people, it might be not good for you. So what's really crucial here is to listen to your own intuition about it and maybe trust it, right, for a change, or to consult with somebody who knows what they are doing, who knows what language learning is about and how it works, to help you build a learning plan so that you can avoid the stuff that really is redundant for you and make sure that you are learning what you need to be learning, right? So this can be individual, bear that in mind. But still, I would argue there's a lot of stuff that presents this noise for very many people. All right, before I jump into the topic and start taking these examples one by one, I would like to reiterate that right now I have a pre-sale for both of my courses, which are based on my zero bullshit policy, of course, because I really can't do it in any other way, as you can imagine. It's Get Your Norwegian Unstuck and it's Speak Norwegian with Confidence. Both of these will be starting up simultaneously at the end of February, the 24th, right after Vinterferie. But they are on pre-sale now at the until the end of the year. So if you want to join any of my courses, I really recommend that you venture to my profile, have a look at the course descriptions, and book a call with me. I opened up my Sunday for the calls as well because I know that I didn't offer very many slots. I was very busy this week. So if you're serious about it, you can even book me this Sunday before I'm off for the holidays, or you can write me a message, whatever. I will help you choose. And they come in 2-for-1 bundles with the crash course in mindset and technique, Dare to Speak Out in Norwegian. And that course I normally sell at just a bit under 2,000 kroner. So that's a bit of money to save. Yeah, so I think this is a good offer. I really like it because Dare to Speak Out in Norwegian is a very good stepping stone for these bigger courses with a lot of support. All right, so that's that. That is said. Now let's go into the method itself. First, I want to tell you how I came up with it, because I didn't learn this in my teacher training, not in the Cambridge training, not in the Norwegian training either. What was happening for me was I was having a lot private lessons, a lot of one-on-ones, and based on how I was learning languages as a learner in courses before, and based on my teacher training and everything, I had this belief as a teacher that all the lessons need to be varied, with all these skills being trained and tested in every single session, and that we have to be switching between activities. There has to be a grammar exercise, there has to be vocabulary exercise, there has to be some reading in the lesson, there has to be whatever. And I was struggling with this because very commonly we would start talking with the student about something of their interest, and they would be asking me, oh, how would you formulate this? How would you formulate that? How does the grammar work in this particular sentence? And I had the lesson plan, right? So I was like answering quickly, trying to get the student back on track without realizing that they were already in track. I was dragging them off the track, right? By trying to push my lesson plan just because I made it, or just because I had this belief that the plan is somehow more valuable than what the student is asking, right? And this I actually did learn in my Cambridge teacher training, we had a very good mentor who told us, make sure you are teaching the students and not the plan, right? When I was observing lessons being taught by teachers as a director of studies, what I saw very often, and what I saw with the other teachers who were taking the teacher training with me, for example, what I see overall is that very many teachers make a plan and then they teach the plan, right? And the more diligent the teacher, the more detailed the plan, the more they try to adhere to it, and they end up teaching the plan and not teaching the students. And that's a bit of a problem, because the students have questions and you have no time to answer them because you have the plan, right? And if the teacher has this belief that I used to have, and that they probably do have because it's reinforced by teacher training, that every session needs to be varied and have all these components, you need to do the reading, you need to practice the all these skills that exist, then you have no time for the students, right? You have to do the plan. Now, obviously, in group sessions, this is more tricky. There has to be some kind of frame, some kind of plan, so that you can promise people where they will get, or where they might get, what kind of course this even is, right? So in group sessions, you have to do a little bit. You still don't have to do like all the types of activities in one session. That's not necessary. And if your teacher tells you it is and you hate it, then just know that your intuition is right. You don't have to do this. And when I learn a language as a language learner, I would never do that, never again. Yeah, I would maybe attend a course to have some structure, but I would only see that as a very small part of my journey. I would take long sessions doing just one thing if I liked it. No pressure to switch to a grammar exercise just because, everybody does that variation thing. But very many teachers are trained that way. There has to be variation. So they are dragging you from one activity to the next, switching quickly so that you don't get the chance to get bored, right? And we will get back to this strategy later on as well. This is some major BS, if you ask me. But it's done a lot because of teacher training, because there is this belief that you have to do it to keep the students engaged, right? So that's one thing. Back to how I came up with it. When teaching one-on-ones, as I said, when you attend a group course, it's a bit more tricky and the teacher has to make a compromise anyhow. But if it's a one-on-one, the teacher really does not have to make any compromises. They just have the time with you, so they can be attending to your own needs. But still, because of this teacher training thingy, because teachers very often believe that the lesson, to be valuable, it has to have all these different components, a grammar exercise and whatnot, they will push it in there. And sometimes the students will like it, sometimes they will hate it. But very often it will be in the way of the more useful stuff. I have colleagues who, and I used to do this as well because that's how I was trained, if they have a one-on-one student and they have maybe a 60-minute session, they would do a little warm-up, right? Just chat about how things are. Then they would go and check their homework in that session, spending like 10 minutes going through homework and explaining it. They could do that outside of the session, or like they could arrange this differently, right? But they would spend maybe 10 minutes of the private session checking the homework. Maybe it's all correct, but you still have to check the homework because that's obligatory. Then maybe doing an exercise, or maybe teaching some grammar because they kind of assess that this grammar might be interesting. And then the student is like, oh, interesting grammar, but they don't know what to do with it, right? Because it's not interesting for them right then. They didn't ask about it. It was just on the plan. Or very many teachers would actually follow a textbook overtly or covertly with you if you take one-on-ones, right? This is very much in the way of your progress because the things are random. Unless you're a complete beginner, then it probably doesn't matter at all. But even like when you start saying the first things, when you're at like A1, max A2, if you want to go fast, you have to go your own way, following your own interests and your own pain points. if your teacher is offering you what's in a textbook somewhere and they say like, today we're doing this grammar and that the exercise, whatever, before you get to doing what you need and want, you have spent half the lesson at the best, checking your homework and doing the grammar exercise that seems obligatory and whatever, right? So when I was doing this as a young teacher, and I was feeling bad because I like my students and I'm chatty, and we always started to talk in English, in Norwegian, the language I was teaching. And we spent half the lesson chatting about something they were truly interested in, and they actually might be chatting about to their English or Norwegian friends. And we wrote a lot of notes as to like, how do you formulate this? I pointed out some grammar in those notes, like, did you see this? This is interesting, and so on. And they're like, yeah. And we couldn't stop. But I was like, but I have the lesson plan, I have the grammar exercise, the random grammar to teach them or whatever, or the vocabulary exercise, or the game that I spent 20-30 minutes preparing. I need to introduce that. So I was like, sorry to interrupt you. Now we'll take the game. All right. And I spent 10 minutes explaining the rules of the game, right? And if you have a group course, maybe you've seen this attending a course, that before your teacher explains how you should do the activity, then 10 minutes sometimes pass because it's difficult and people don't get it, then people do something else. And maybe the fact that it was gamified was not such an advantage because nobody got it and people were focusing on doing the game rules rather than getting the language straight. I don't know, maybe you like the games, and this is not like all one size fits all. This can be different. There is nuance, and teachers are different. So some teachers are really good at putting together these games and introducing them in class. Most are not, from what I have seen, and I have seen very many teachers in many places teaching. And most of them, if they are to introduce this game, then students are not used to playing these games, and it doesn't work that well every time. Yeah, some simple stuff like rolling the dice and deciding if it's a yes or no, all right, to drill. But if it's too complicated, then I call BS on that personally, because you are putting the game, like, look how fun this activity is, look how well I'm prepared for this lesson as a teacher. You're putting that ahead, right? Or the teacher's putting that ahead of the students' needs again, because like, the game is the game, but how do I take the game and use it with my colleagues when I want to speak Norwegian? That's the problem for most students, right? So again, I was spending so much time on explaining these and then on wrapping these up, and then in the middle of the game, still the student would ask me like, but how would you formulate this? And we started chatting again, and I felt so bad for it, right? Do you know what I do today with private students? We go ahead and we chat. I don't stop them, and I'm not like, I have a grammar exercise for you. No, I give them the grammar exercise based on the needs that bubble up from the conversation. And this has given me some ease, because I don't have to be thinking about artificial things to prepare. I can prepare maybe podcasts or articles or whatever for the student on the topic that they like, so that they can pre-read them and they have more vocabulary, right? But we're not sitting in the lesson going through the article together and translating it line for line, for example. We don't do that. But you have technology to do that. This is a waste of most people's time, most of the time. We could be reading. If people want pronunciation practice, one of the best ways of doing it is not talking, because it's very hard to multitask and get it straight there, right? If somebody's goal is pronunciation, we get through some of the basic rules that we kind of run into because of the practical side. We talk and I see what the problem is, right? Then we do that. Then we might just spend the lesson reading a book together aloud and checking the pronunciation. Yeah, not because loud reading is not useful for the sake of reading. That's not a useful thing to do at all. Or like reading in front of the whole class, that's not useful at all. But one-on-one, you can happily sit together with your teacher and read a book, because then they can point out to you, look, this is the stuff we talked about, this and this again, and you will see it in real life context, for Christ's sake, right? That is very efficient. I've done that with many students, and reading 3-4 pages of the book straight is much more useful than doing these random conversations in class when nobody's correcting you anyhow, not on everything either, and you can't really figure it out based on the spelling, like it's not efficient. Yeah. So that's how I came up with it. I just noticed that all my professional lesson plans, based on these teachers' beliefs, were in the way of my students' needs in the lessons. Yeah, I worked extra to make the lesson worse, right? And I was like, this is ridiculous. Then I stopped doing it, and my students started progressing more, right? And obviously we do grammar exercises if it's necessary, but it's not like, hello, grammar is ABC. It's like we speak. And for example, you can do this in group courses as well. I do it in Get Your Norwegian Unstuck, for example. I'm running a group right now, and we had a lesson yesterday evening that was very lovely with this Christmas topic. And what I noticed there is that a lot of my students want to use these complex sentences where you have a time sentence, a time clause, or an if clause in the first spot. Yeah, like for example, da jeg var et barn, likte jeg snø. Yeah, something like that. And there's a lot of grammar happening in a sentence like that. And what I do is, when they attempt at saying it, I put it in our notes, right? And I point it out, and I'm like, look, this is the plus and, this is the plus two, this is how the time clauses work when they go first. And they're like, oh, interesting, complicated, whatever. Then we go ahead, we keep it in the notes. We go ahead, and in 5 minutes, somebody else says a sentence with the very same structure, not whatever, and then the verb and whatever, right? Når vi pynter juletreet, blir barna glade. Yeah, for example. And most people get this wrong, right? This is a complicated structure that people tend to get wrong, but that people also tend to need in their speaking. This is a very, very useful structure in your speaking. In the textbook, it's kind of hidden. It comes kind of late for what you need. It's kind of this like complex sentences. I'm going to drop it probably, yeah? But people need this for speaking. So if you could fix this, it would move the needle so much for you. You would gain confidence on knowing how to formulate this. And this is something you need to formulate every second minute in reality, because we speak like that a lot. We use a lot of time clauses and if clauses. We just do. That's how we speak. And people get really happy. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize that this, and that situation actually require this same structure. And they look at it once, twice, 3 times. They get desperate because of the verb plus 2 thing in the complex sentence and the internal structure of the clause and whatever. When they see it for the 10th time during the lesson or in the next lesson, they're like, oh, actually, I think I can learn this, right? They start to see the pattern. And this, in my experience, is very, very efficient. And then people see that we have written it 7 times during that one lesson, different examples. They can put them in their vocabulary application as they are and learn these sentences or learn these clauses at least. And they will be like, this grammar, I think it's useful, or I can point it out to them and be like, see that you have a lot of need for this kind of structure. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, do you want an exercise to practice this thing? And they're like, yeah, sure, I do. And then they get that exercise as homework, right? And what I do with one-on-ones is I don't check homework in the lesson. I think the time is very variable that we have together. But instead, I have a look at it, yeah? And if they have any problem with the exercises, they send me screenshots. And I can comment on it in between the lessons. Or maybe we can talk about it in the lesson, but we're not like getting through the sentences, having them read them or whatever. That's a waste of everybody's time. It's not a good thing. In a group course, in the traditional setting, maybe it's good to get through a bit of the homework. It's mostly for accountability anyhow, right? And because of there are too many people to actually attend to their individual problems. But if everybody was accountable and prepared questions, then there would be no need at all to get through homework in class. Yeah, it's because of explaining the problematic examples, right? People could ask about that. You could save time and be more on spot, but that's how it is in traditional classes, right? In my classes, what I do in one-on-ones, I have a look up front before the lesson, and if they had no problem, they just tell me like, it's done, it's clear. Why would we talk about it? Because the problem for them or for you, right? I think this is the same for you, is not understanding versus not understanding the grammar. That might be a problem in the face. But if you manage to do the exercise and you did just fine and it was self-correcting, you see like no problem, then clearly understanding is not your problem. But the transfer into speaking, that's the problem. So you need to focus on that. So, and this is another piece of BS that's slowing people down a lot and frustrating them. And I see it a lot with teachers. I think this kind of stems from misunderstanding what's going on, is that people do the exercise, they do fine, then you talk with the teacher and you make the same mistake in the speaking. And the teacher thinks like, oh, okay, so probably more exercises, right? But you don't learn this by exercises. You learn this by repeatedly, and that repeatedly, that's at least in 2 digits, right? This is not like 3 times repeatedly. This is like 85 times repeatedly, or maybe 200 times, right? Depending on what it is. So just to be clear on this here, repeatedly meeting it in that relevant context, which is you speaking about something spontaneous, right? Let's face it, it's not like you trying to do the task from your textbook, even if it's oral. It's you trying to explain to me what the problem was when your kid got stuck on the way to kindergarten yesterday, right? Because this is something you might be sharing with your colleague as well. Or maybe you want to talk to me about a project you have at work. You want to maybe pretend that I'm your coworker and you have this problem with the project and you want to troubleshoot on the project. And you start doing that in Norwegian, you run into a wall. That's efficient because you found the gap, right? And you're like, all right, here is the gap, teacher. How should I say this? How should I formulate? Then you attempt, and maybe you will run into these time clauses or if clauses. In troubleshooting, a lot of if clauses included, I can guarantee, right? And when you do that, and I'm like, remember that structure we talked about, it's a useful one here. Try to do it that way. You try, you do it wrong, and I'm like, okay, watch out, verb plus 2, we do it, and you're like, oh, right? And then again, and again, and again, but real life context, running into a wall, making the mistake in real life context, getting it straight in that context. That's how you learn it, right? But if it's traditional, then the best you can get is like an extra exercise, like a sheet. The examples in these exercises tend to be all the same, right? It's the same one versus the one that you produce yourself, complaining about, I don't know, the queue in the shop or talking about your work project. You are going to have different examples that you haven't seen in the exercises. And that means you are missing input on the thing that you want to say. So filling more exercises is useful if you like understanding, but it's not useful when you want to learn to apply it into your own reality, right? That's something different. That's the transfer scale. You can transfer something from the exercises, sure. But what very many people need, and what's the efficient thing that, because of all this noise, you don't get time for in a traditional lesson, is that the teacher can be pointing out for you the chances to transfer. Look here, this is where you could use that structure. Look here, this is it again, this is it again, and this is it again. And this is so useful for people, yeah? And they feel like they're progressing, because they are, because in 60 minutes, they have figured out that much, you know, like you run into these walls because you speak spontaneously and you get help with that. And you see the pattern emerge out of your own needs, yeah? And as you hear me talking about this, I think it's clear that if the teacher has this straight plan in the mind and they believe that every lesson has to contain a listening exercise, every lesson has to contain a reading exercise, every lesson has to contain the group work and the grammar exercise and whatever, then there is no time to be troubleshooting like that. Yeah, even if the thing that the teacher waves their hand over and they're like, we don't have time for that stuff, that is the stuff that would move the needle. Yeah, that it's sad. And as I said, in group courses, of course, there has to be some kind of compromise. In the traditional setting, a lot of compromises. But in one-on-ones, even in one-on-ones, teachers still follow these structures. And sometimes the students want to work on grammar explicitly. They want to get through an exercise and get it explained. Occasionally, this might be fruitful, but it's not like imagining that doing the same structure every time will get anybody anywhere else than where they already are, right? I want to now talk about the components that I typically drop out of my courses and out of my one-on-ones, definitely. And they are not bad in themselves. I just think that the way they are used, they present a lot of noise. And then people think that this must be very important, but it's just a random option, actually. Yeah. So one thing that I do drop is textbooks. And I think textbooks, that's a good thing if you're a complete beginner. And then maybe grammar books, if you're interested in grammar, but not like getting through the book from cover to cover, but for reference, right? As a reference book, you get interested into some particular grammar, and then it might be very good to work on it from different angles. So maybe look it up on YouTube, listen about it, ask your teacher, go to the reference book and look it up. That might be very good. But again, random grammar for people who are not grammar nerds from before is usually not something very fruitful because you don't see the application, right? But when you talk to somebody, you run into a wall, you figure out which structure this is, and then you're like, now I'm interested in that structure because I see this structure is what has me run into the wall very often. And this is a little different for everybody. And I have a lot of students who have a particular structure that they like using. This is the way you like to formulate yourself. So if you just identified that structure and learned it, it would be better progression for your real life speaking than a whole course could be, right? So you need somebody to tell you, like, every time you stop up, you're actually looking for this. And here is it, right? And then iterate on it. So, and in textbooks, you have a lot of random grammar, a lot of random topics, vocabulary just getting served to you. And transferring it into your own context is typically difficult for people. That's where the problem lies, yeah? And it's boring. And the reason why it's boring, by the way, is also that it feels irrelevant. And we feel like, oh, I should not be this bad student who only complains. This should be relevant. But really, it's not relevant. Even if you have use for it, you don't know that you have use for it very often. I have this experience with my students a lot, that when they run into the wall trying to say something and I offer the structure, they're like, oh, actually, I learned the structure in the textbook. But the fact that you learned it in an academic way doesn't help you realize that, oh, actually, I could use this to express that. You have to work on that transfer separately to realize that, yeah? And when you just drop the textbook from A2 level up, yeah? If like the B1 textbook, I would happily drop it, especially if you're working with a private teacher. There is no need to go with a textbook, not at the start either, even though that's a bit more kind of difficult for the teacher, but that's not your problem for that matter. But a B1 and above, there really is no need to work with a textbook unless you really want to. And if you speak, if you take the speaking or listening, it could be perceptive skills as well, listening or reading to real life stuff as your starting point, or the speaking, trying to express yourself, and now you don't know how. And then you pick the grammar of interest from that. Yeah, you see, I'm a fan of grammar. I'm not like, don't do the grammar, happily do the grammar unless you hate it. Yeah, you don't have to do as much as of it either as you would think based on the regular course. But I love grammar, obviously. I'm the biggest grammar nerd in town, probably. So I like grammar, but I don't like serving it unsolicited. Yeah. So when people didn't want to do it, or they can't see how this is useful, and sometimes Norwegian teachers are like, every grammar is useful. Sure, but you can't be learning all grammar at once. It's impossible. You have to focus on something and implement it to move ahead. And if you just drop the textbook because it's distracting you, right? And you try to formulate, you figure out, oh, I would need this, then you get naturally motivated to study that. And the studying of that grammar compared to if that same grammar would just randomly pop up in the textbook because it's its turn, if it comes directly from your own needs, that you identified it as the gap in trying to say something spontaneous in real life, then you would be so much more efficient than if it's just random, that you'll be like, okay, studying, I have to study, I'm a good student, I study, but you have a very, very abstract idea about how you would use this. Versus if it's the other way around, right? Then you know exactly how you will use it and you will learn it like that compared to when it's random. So textbooks, yeah? I don't mean to say here that textbooks are the BS in the equation, yeah? I just don't use them. And I would use a textbook for myself, maybe, but not as something that I would believe would teach me the language. I would use a beginner textbook probably because you need some kind of entrance point. It kind of doesn't matter either. So I would probably use that for myself. And I might use a more advanced textbook as well, but I would not rely on it at all. I would just be like, today I feel like a textbook, and I like textbooks, you know, I like grammar, I like the reference book. I like to read it cover to cover, right? But I realized that this is maybe like 2% of the population, so I'm not expecting my students to be doing that. It's not efficient for most people. And when I'm doing the textbook like that, it's just like, today I feel like the textbook, so I make a cup of tea and I do like an hour of the textbook. Randomly, I'm just like, textbook time, I just do whatever. It doesn't matter, right? You don't have to cover this before you can move on to that. And sometimes teachers believe that, and they would tell you, like, I cannot explain the adjectives to you because we haven't done the nouns yet. And this kind of explanation order, it's for the teaching convenience, right? It's not with the learner in mind, or it is with an imaginary learner in mind who learns in the way as it is convenient to teach. Yeah, it's convenient for the teacher to have explained nouns before adjectives, because then they can say, oh, I'm the gender, remember? Yeah, but it's impossible for you as the student to just randomly learn the gender on all nouns. You know that, like, which gender is whatever noun. How should you know until you know it, right? And if you follow the textbook and you believe that what's in there, it's written in stone because that's how learning the language works. And if you fail to do that, you must be failing at learning the language or whatever. And a lot of people have this deep down. Then you would believe your teacher when they say, like, I can't explain to you how the adjectives work or whatever. When in reality, Norwegian kids, and I remember I said this before on a live stream, Norwegian kids, when they are asked to determine the gender of a noun, they would imagine it in a combination with an adjective, and they would go by the adjective, you know, so they know how the phrase goes, and they determine the gender of the noun based on the adjective. So that, you know, like the thing that your textbook might be suggesting, it doesn't make sense. It makes teaching convenience kind of sense, but it doesn't make sense in terms of how language acquisition works in your head, like for real. Yeah. So the textbook, yeah, I would just drop it definitely from B1 and upwards, because it presents a lot of noise for students. It introduces a lot of negative emotions as well, and a lot of potential failure and demotivation, and yeah, like it just doesn't work. Yeah, for very many people. If it works for you, then good for you. If it doesn't, feel free to get rid of it and just do something else. I recommend, instead of doing the textbook, paying 150 kroner and getting access to one of these resources attached to the textbooks. They are much better, yeah. And you can just work in there randomly as you like, or you can find the grammar that you figure out that you need to work on, yeah. All right, another thing that I don't do, that I drop in my group courses and then I drop overall, is gamification. And gamification sometimes can be good. I, for example, support my students in working with a Duolingo or whatever that they like, because sometimes we just need the push. But having to gamify something, for me, is a sign, and I also remember talking about this before, but it's very important, is a sign that you did not feel that the thing was really worth doing, unless it was gamified, right? So you're doing it just because it's gamified. And okay, sometimes things are hard for us. We kind of know we want them, but there is this difficult bit. So a bit of gamification is okay, especially if you choose it yourself, yeah? But if your teacher gamifies the whole lesson and makes everything a competition, and there are points and there's a Kahoot and whatever, I'm not sure how much this does for your actual learning, and especially for your goals of speaking naturally. But the fact that it's gamified makes you pull through the lesson more easily, yeah? If the teacher is good at it and it's fun and all that, that it might be good. It might create positive emotions in the class, which are important for learning, so that's good. But if the competition stresses people out, and it's usually 50-50, so I would say, like, at the end of the day, we are even, right? So if it stresses you out, then your affective filter gets activated, you're not learning that efficiently. So the gamification might be positive for some people, it might be negative for some other people if it wasn't self-chosen, right? If you're like, I really want this, I know I struggle pulling through, so I'm gonna devise some kind of point system for myself. Like, if I study this thing, I really want to study for 2 hours, then I'll have that little chocolate, whatever. Like, you can do that for yourself, yeah, these rewards and stuff. But if your teacher chooses to motivate you using this, then it's a sign that you didn't want to do the thing that they wanted you to do in the first place, and you only do it because of the incentive or because it's kind of fun, but then you don't remember the thing either, right? So it really depends. For me, gamification is a very slippery slope, and I like when it's self-chosen by the student, as in, like, I'm gonna work with Duolingo and I'm gonna collect the hearts or whatever, compete with my friends because I chose it. But if the teacher makes you to, like, for example, playing the Kahoot is great. I love the music, I love the concept, but I'm a slow reader. So for me, even if I know the answers, I don't stand a chance of ever not completely losing at the Kahoot because I can't manage to read it. And I have the experience that a lot of people do the same. When I had some Kahoots with kids, I've worked with kids for a short period. I can't really do that, but I did that for a short period. And they wanted the Kahoot all the time. So I made some Kahoots for them. And you know what they did? They wanted to win, so they never ever read the questions. They just took the chance, and they enjoyed the music, and that was the adrenaline involved, but they learned nothing, nada, right? And I'm not saying adults are like these kids who just press the buttons quickly to maximize the chance of actually, winning. But for me, when I attended something like a julebord or whatever, and we had a fun Kahoot, it stressed me out because I never managed to read it quickly enough. And it doesn't mean I can't read. I read a lot of books, and everything. But the Kahoot stressed me out. And I have the same experience with a percentage of my students, maybe a third. Maybe a third of my students loved the Kahoot, adult students, I mean. A third were neutral and was like, yeah, it's kind of fun, whatever. And then the rest hated it, or maybe they didn't even join in because they didn't want to, yeah. So again, if the teacher is very good at administering this, if they put a lot of thought into the contents, the language contents of that game or of that system. Or sometimes I would have a motivational table for people to put in how long they watched TV or whatever. So if I see that the group kind of would like that, I do it. But if I see that they struggle, I would not do it, because this is sometimes good, sometimes bad, yeah? And ideally, like I say, ideally self-chosen. If you have a motivational table for yourself and you're like, when I have like 15 hours of whatever there in total, I will treat myself to whatever, and that's your private game, good, unless you attach yourselves too much to the incentive and you put up with stuff you shouldn't actually be doing, right? You need to be checking on that. But if it's good for you, it's good for you. It was self-chosen. But if I tell my students, like, especially if it's kids, but even adults, like kids will start cheating, right, and putting in stuff that isn't true, adults will drop out and just not do it because they don't care, yeah? So if your lessons are built on extensive gamification, give it a second thought, like, what about the contents? Is there maybe a problem with the contents, yeah? Because when I, for example, speak to one-on-one students, they never complain that the lesson wasn't fun enough or relevant enough because there wasn't any game in it, yeah? I don't prepare games for my one-on-one students. We just do the thing that's relevant for them, and the time flies by before they know it, and they have spoken 70% of the time, right? And they didn't even know it, and they're like, whoa, this didn't even hurt, and they're not missing the game at all because the contents was relevant, yeah? So I think that's it. So I'm gonna do a summary on this because I take a lot of detours, as you're used to with me. So how I came up with the zero bullshit method, which is based on talking to the student, having them speak spontaneously, and this can be done even in group courses to a large degree, and picking on the things that they say, building it from there. And this will inform all our choices of the grammar, of the vocabulary, of everything, of building the skills to express themselves, yeah? I came up with this because I saw that my educated professional lesson plans were pretty much in the way of my students' needs and progression. They didn't need my superb plans. And you might think I had bad lesson plans, but like they were pretty much okay. When I did the teacher training, my mentor was really happy with my lesson plans and everything, right? But my students, even in the teacher training, they were very happy with me not sticking to the plan. So, you know, I planned this perfect plan, and then they would ask, and I would go to them, and we would like fix stuff, and we would attend to what they needed. And then the students would say like, that was a great lesson. And I was like, oh, but I only did half of my plan, and then, you know, we went astray. But where you go astray, led by the student as a teacher, that's when the real work is happening. So that's how I realized it. And I reduced my lesson plans heavily, and I upped my skills of building it from the students' needs, right? Then the most, or the biggest things that actually can become BS or can become a lot of noise, can become the hindrances rather than what's moving you, is this upfront grammar, upfront vocabulary that somebody else chooses for you. Like, hello guys, today we're going to learn about whatever the if clauses, yeah? Very many people do not have naturally the transferring skill from this theory into their practice. So if you can take it, if the teacher can take it with you from the practice and into the theory, picking the theory based on the practice, getting rid of this upfront grammar and vocabulary that wasn't solicited, yeah, then it will happen, yeah, more quickly, more easily. And the gamification, that's a big aspect of what I think can be in the way for many people in very many course structures, because there has to be variation, there has to be gamification so that it's engaging. And in my experience, also from studying the pedagogical course here in Norway and whatever, I don't mean to be mean, and I know that there is a lot variable in pedagogy, but as I observed pedagogy in practice, very many times with kids and with adults, what's happening is the teacher trying to do it so that the students don't notice that they didn't care about the stuff that they were learning in the first place, right? Like how to fix it so that the students learn about this without realizing they didn't want to learn about it. So for example, let's gamify it, or let's switch activities in a dynamic way so that they don't notice that is actually boring and irrelevant, you know? And obviously, as adults, you want to be learning Norwegian, sure, but maybe you are sensing, and rightly so, that you don't want to be learning this particular subject matter or in this particular order or in this particular way, right? It's real. And if your teacher gives you incentives, I don't know. If you ask me, I think this contributes to the noise, to kind of you putting up with the noise rather than saying, like, I'm not doing that. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. I just want to say a quick word about, I talked a lot about what I do in one-on-ones with my students. And in one-on-ones, it's really easy. That's the best environment to see the students, see their needs, and attend to that. That's clear. In group courses, the way I solve this, and this is, of course, like you have to make a compromise for a group because you need to tell them what the course will contain. But I always try to pull in people with more levels, not like vastly different levels, but like strong A2, B1, B2 together, because they can learn from each other and they can get feedback from me, right? And I work a lot with modeling. So I do pick the topic up front because I kind of have to do that in a course. I can't say like we're gonna talk about whatever. Yeah, I have to show people the topics. But for example, in Get Your Norwegian Unstuck, we have topics that are common small talk topics that can be useful. And twice a week, I model for students. So I put out a short video of 5 minutes, me talking about the topic, putting in the grammar that we have that week. So in Get Your Norwegian Unstuck, we do have grammar topics. I have lessons on the grammar topics that people typically get wrong in speaking, in spite of understanding them. So I explain how it works and how to transfer into speaking. But then I model on the topic. So I take a question that I think is interesting, and you could talk about it to your neighbor. Like, for example, now we have the Christmas topic, and one of our modeling topics was Hva har du rukket av juleforberedelser? Like, what have you managed to do? What have you had time to do? And people are like, oh my God, I haven't packed any presents. I still know what to give to my auntie, you know, and they start speaking naturally because everybody's thinking about it. But what I do before I have them speak is I model, and I'm kind of experienced in putting in the grammar of interest and whatever. But I first speak, and then I listen back to what I said in the modeling video, right? And I put together a vocabulary list. So that means I'm not offering you upfront vocabulary as in, this word might be useful and now let's build the sentences. No, I say the sentences as I would actually say them, talking to my neighbor. Then I put together the natural real life vocabulary list that actually exists, and I present that to the students. And they can pick from there, and they can practice in writing on their own, right? So, and they have these real life phrases that they can put into the vocabulary application if they want. They decide what to pick and what not. And then we have the speaking lesson, and I offer phrases with the grammar so that we push in the new thing. But they speak about their own thing. They try to use the things I offer on the slide. And then when they get to these complex sentences that they don't know how to formulate, they're hitting the wall or they're saying it somehow wrong, I pick up on it, put it in our notes and explain it, right? And then we have a Q&A session every week. So the whole week, students can send me questions asking about whatever. So maybe they do the modeling, they listen to it, go through the vocabulary list, go through the grammar lesson, and they're like, I wonder about this thing, I don't really understand it. They put it in the Q&A, and I can speak about it at length without taking from the speaking lesson, right? And that's how they get to understand, they get to learn the grammar that they're actually interested in. Or maybe they can just ask about anything else that they're interested in, right? That's the beauty. So it's a compromise still. I need to pick the topics up front, but it's the best I came up with. I'm really proud of that structure because it allows students the agency, right? They don't have to take what a textbook would offer. They can always pick and choose, and they can ask about their own thing, yeah, and they still get the correction and the suggestions on the formulations, even if it's a group course, and typically more people are interested in the same. And then my other course, that's a coaching group, so that's something else. That's like it's like one-on-one inside a course. So if you are B1 plus and you really want to level up, you should have a look at that. It's Speak Norwegian with Confidence. Then there is a speaking assignment every week, and you get the feedback one-on-one. So that's almost like having one-on-ones, yeah. So I choose the topic again up front. I model, so you always get the modeling from me. I think this is very important. But then you get personalized feedback, that you get the feedback every week. It builds on top of each other. So that's a beautiful course. I love it. But that's for a bit more advanced students, I would say. So that's how I kind of figured out how to get rid of the noise in my courses. I still have to pick up the topics up front, I think, but well, you can get rid of it largely. Yeah. All right. Before I say goodbye today, just a reminder that both these courses are now on pre-sale until the end of 2024. You can still book me for a discovery call on Sunday. I'm sorry about that. Or today, 15:30. Actually, I have one slot today as well. I will share the booking link in the comments when I'm done here. Or you can just find the courses on my profile. You can just jump on straight up if you want. If you're unsure which one, I really recommend that you talk to me. Only book me for the Sunday if you really mean it, because my family will hate me if I have too many calls on Sunday. But it's open, right, so that you can ask, because I'm out of office from Monday. And also, I still have one-on-ones from January. So if you want, talk to me about that, drop me an email or a message so that we can talk about that. Okay, that's it. God jul. This wasn't a very Christmassy topic, but I think all of us deserve the gift of like not going through tons of noise every time we try to learn Norwegian. So in that sense, it's Christmassy, right? So God jul, godt nyttår. I won't be sending any lives during the Christmas break, but I'll be back in January. And hopefully see you on a course of mine or in one-on-ones for some bullshit-free Norwegian learning for a change. All right, have a beautiful Christmas break. Ha det bra.